Hi, I'm Ashton. I use he, they pronouns, and today I'm sitting here on my floor with a nice coffee that I made myself and my cat wandering around the room. So if you hear scrambling noises, that would be her. And today I wanted to talk about autistic masking. I do want it to be clear right off the bat that I'm talking about masking as in autistic camouflaging into the world, like the autistic experience of masking your autism and not like COVID face masks. I wanted to make that clarification early on because I do also talk about the importance of wearing a mask pretty frequently. Also, before I get into discussing anything of importance, I have store updates again. So quick fire shop updates for anyone who cares to know. My Trans Pansy and Feel No Shame patches are both back in stock in the white ink on black fabric versions. I have about 80 new pinback buttons that are up. I now have digital options for my two bigger zines, and shipping to both Canada and the UK have also now been added. If you watched my last video, you may already know a couple of those things, but regardless, all of that is currently there, so go check it out if you're interested. I talk about being autistic online relatively frequently. I've known that I'm autistic for like 6 years-ish. I'm 22 for reference. My relationship with a formal autism diagnosis is complicated, and I'm not going to discuss that right here, right now, because it's kind of complicated. I don't appreciate, like, comments that speculate about whether or not I'm actually autistic. If you're in autistic circles or in autistic communities, you would know that is, like, kind of off the table and a shitty thing to do, to speculate about. Those comments will be just flat out ignored. Sorry, they might even be deleted if they're mean enough. And I don't say this to try to like garner sympathy. I just say this because every single time I talk about being autistic on the internet, there is a 99.999% chance that I will get at least 1 to 10 comments that are either "you're obviously not autistic," or "stop talking about autism if you don't have a formal diagnosis," which you don't even know the status of if I have a formal diagnosis or not. And the earlier on in a video, I explicitly say that I don't care about that type of comment, the less likely they are to be left. So that's why I say this. It is very bizarre being autistic on the internet in general, because while I get that type of comment, I also very frequently get called the R word. I frequently get told, obviously you're autistic because you're stupid, you're dumb, you look weird, so obviously you're autistic. Like, it's a very weird space to be in, and I'm sure I'm not the only one where like you are called autistic as an insult, but you are also told that you're not autistic as an insult. Very bizarre space to live in, isn't it? Regardless, I will not be paying heed to any of those comments, and if you see comments like that, please don't interact with them, just ignore them. I also wanted to note before I get started that this video is moderately inspired / influenced by 2 other videos. A recent one by Foster on the Spectrum, where he talks about masking and unmasking and autism, and another one by my friend Lavender Leaf, where they talk about their autism and their experiences with it, and they do talk about masking a little bit. I've talked about autism with Lavender many a time, and I've talked about autism with many of my internet friends frequently. I love having autistic internet friends. It truly helps me understand myself, and hopefully helps them understand themselves as well. There's a very nice, like, autistic to autistic communication that goes on, you know? So I always appreciate that. Internet friends are delightful as an autistic person, and I feel like I experience them differently than autistic people do, but that could just be a me thing. I don't want to claim that as an autism thing, but if anyone else has similar experiences, let me know. I guess before I talk about my experiences, I should give a brief definition of masking and like what it is. Autistic masking in general, I kind of already explained this, but is the experience of, as an autistic person, covering up your autistic traits, whether it is on purpose or whether it is something that is kind of learned in a Pavlovian sense, in order to blend in more, in order to not be ridiculed, in order to feel or appear more normal, quote unquote, whatever that means, right? In order to blend into social spheres, societies, interactions, circles that are primarily made up of neurotypical people, allistic people, and try to survive, honestly. It's a survival tactic, it's a coping tactic to like live in a world that does not accommodate you as an autistic person. Not all autistic people are capable of masking. It is in some sense a privilege. At the same time, masking can be harmful for the people that do it, and I'm going to talk a bit about that later as well. Generally, masking is something that is associated with autistic people with lower support needs, which is also a group you may have heard referred to as high-functioning autistic people. Functioning labels have kind of fallen out of fashion for a whole host of reasons that I'm not going to get into now. Regardless, masking is something that is more commonly associated with autistic people with lower support needs. It is also something that is more commonly associated with autistic women and girls, which is interesting, and I'm going to talk a bit about that as well. But largely what I want to impress upon you is that masking is kind of complicated. Hiding your autistic traits, whether it's intentional or not, whether it is because of bullying, whether it is because of your self-imposed or internalized ableism, all of these things can lead to masking. And although it is to an extent a privilege to be able to blend into a neurotypical society, not all autistic people who mask equally effectively. You can mask badly, you can fail at masking. I have definitely before been in situations where I've tried to mask and it just didn't work, and that can also suck, to try to mask and not be able to do it and still get ridiculed for your autistic traits that you are actively trying to hide. So just because the ability to mask is a privilege does not mean that it always has good outcomes. It doesn't mean that it always works. It doesn't mean that it makes life easy. It doesn't make you neurotypical. It doesn't make you allistic. So those are some, I guess, preliminary points that I wanted to draw out. There is a lot of information about masking online, and I'm going to link to a few articles down below in addition to the videos that I mentioned that helped me further understand it, I guess. But the really interesting thing about my relationship with masking, which is the primary purpose that I'm talking about this, I guess, is that I wanted to make a video about it. But when I was figuring out that I was autistic like 5 to 7 years ago, right, there was less discussion of masking as a phenomenon, and a part of that was because it is not something that was recognized in like medical communities. There were definitely not as many autistic advocates back then. I didn't know as many autistic people. I didn't have as strong of an autistic community around me, and being around autistic people and talking to autistic people is a lot of what helped me figure out I was autistic, or am autistic. But as my circles have grown and as I've learned more about autism, obviously there are going to be things that I learn, and learning about masking is one of those. So even though I've known about masking for a while, it is not something that I have thought deeply about until much more recently, I would say in the past 2 or 3 years. And yeah, part of that is because it's not talked about outside of autistic communities. A part of that is also because it can be really, really hard to deconstruct what is masking and what isn't, which is something that Foster talked about in his video as well. Another thing is, and something that you'll notice if you read the things that I've linked down below, is that because masking is something that is more commonly found in autistic women and girls, being trans and non-binary, like myself, like many of my autistic friends are, it can feel kind of alienating reading about this thing you definitely experience and definitely know about on a personal level, written in terms of like, this is for women and girls. There's a lot of like, inflammatory isn't the right word, but like there's a lot of sensationalizing articles about masking, and a lot of them focus on women and girls. Not that women and girls don't deserve to be focused on. In many cases, they definitely do. But masking is not something that only applies to women and girls, and that is an unfortunate side effect that can kind of come out of those articles sometimes when they frame it as something that women and girls experience. That can feel shitty being a trans person who is definitely not a woman or a girl, who also experiences masking to a very high degree. And this is also kind of a larger issue in terms of representation, where a lot of the most prominent autistic advocates are cis people, and a lot of autistic people are trans and non-binary. And I say this from my own experiences in queer circles and autistic circles. There is a massive queer autistic overlap that doesn't really get as much light shed upon it in terms of who gets the mic, if that makes sense. Obviously, this is the case in many, many communities and many, many overlaps of marginalized identities, where you only get to speak on such and such marginalized identity if you're like the perfect example of that. And the representation politics in terms of autistic circles are very similar to those in many, many other marginalized communities, where I think about like the most popular, well-known trans people, right? They're not going to be the autistic trans people. They're going to be white, they're going to be skinny, they're going to be well off, they're going to have as many operations as they want. Being multiply marginalized makes it a lot harder to find representations of yourself, whether it is in pop culture, media, or even advocacy. And when it's hard to see yourself in not only like mass media, but also advocacy for marginalized groups, it is a lot harder to identify yourself and figure out what you are and who you are and where you came from. Because if you're autistic and a man, and trans on top of that, and you see all of these articles about this trait that autistic women have, it's going to be a lot harder to identify with, if that makes sense. I had a conversation with a friend recently who's in the process of trying to figure out whether or not he's autistic, and a part of his struggle in doing so is that he is a person of color and is trans, And there is very, very little representation for trans autistic people of color. There's very little representation for trans people of color. There's very little representation for autistic people of color. There's very little representation for trans autistic people. All of these things are like so intertwined, but are separated so much in terms of how the world is viewed through a typical lens, if that makes sense. And it's not that those overlaps don't exist, because they very, very much do. It's just that the people whose voices get listened to do not belong to multiple marginalized groups, which sucks. And those people's voices absolutely deserve to be listened to in like every possible way, obviously. But the fact that representation is such a fleeting and imperfect thing really just adds to this whole issue. It feels like I'm going on a bit of a tangent, but I feel like it's important and I just wanted to bring it up. Long story short, that's a part of why I wanted to talk about this. I know that a proportion of my audience is also autistic trans people, and I want more of us to be able to talk about being both autistic and trans and what that means and the complexities that brings about without it having to be like a side note, you know? And I don't want this to come off as like, I'm what the autistic community needs, because I don't think I am. I want to see more autistic people with high support needs talking about their lives. I want to see more Black and Indigenous and Asian and every ethnicity. Like, I want to see more non-white people talking about being autistic. I want to see more trans and non-binary people talking about being autistic. I want to see more. That's the thing, I guess, is that I want to see more of everyone who is multiply marginalized. And yes, I'm included in that category, but I'm not like everyone, you know? I can't be everyone, and no one can be everyone. I just want to see more diversity in general. And I don't want to see it on a surface level. I don't want to see one of everything. I want everyone to feel like they are represented when they look at autistic circles, and I don't feel like that is what is happening right now. And I think the consequence of that is that there are a lot of autistic people who struggle to understand who they are. Tangent over. Moving on. But largely that's why I wanted to talk about this, if that makes sense, because I am trans and I want to see more trans people talk about being autistic and masking, especially because it is something that is so highly associated with women and girls, and I am not in that category, but masking is something that is definitely very much impacted my life, like my day-to-day, how I live. With all that out of the way, I think I can finally actually talk about masking itself. I don't have like a script for this video. I just have a few notes that I wanted to talk about. And these are by far not every single experience of masking that I know of in my own life. There is way more than this. I can't talk about everything. It would be a very, very long video. And it feels like I'm still noticing things and still realizing things from like my childhood or like my teenage years of, oh, this thing was an autistic trait. This thing that I was bullied for or punished for was an autistic trait. And that is such a common experience for me that every time I look back at that, it kind of sucks. Something that Foster said in his video about masking, and something that I want to echo too, is that yes, also neurotypical people and autistic people may experience a similar phenomenon of like trying to blend in to society as a whole, but it is not the same as the distinctly autistic experience of being autistic in your brain, like in your body, in your entire being, and having to both consciously and non-consciously like adapt to a world that hates you. Like if you're autistic and you mask, like saying you're fine when you're not, that can be a masking experience, but it is not the same as autistic masking. I'm specifically talking about this as an autistic experience. And just because the language is not only applicable to autistic people doesn't mean that it is not a distinctly autistic experience. Like I mentioned earlier, I have like known about the phenomena of masking for a few years, but it only became something that was like medically or professionally recognized relatively recently. The Wikipedia page for autistic masking didn't exist until 2020. Articles on like assorted popular autism blogs and websites on masking also didn't exist until like 2020, 2022, 2023 era. So like relatively recently, this is something that more and more people have been picking up on, which again is good, but not everyone always picks up on it in the most expansive/inclusive way. Regardless, I have read a lot about masking recently, and in reading more about it, I have realized more and more and more how much it has impacted my life as a whole. My life currently, yes, but also like my experiences as a child. And it's been a very, very bizarre and like quasi-traumatic experience like realizing these things about myself, but there is no other way for me to describe going through the process of realizing and like deeply understanding that all of my earliest memories, all of my earliest like knowledge of myself has been shaped by people around me hating my autistic traits, punishing them out of me, bullying them out of me, etc. Like that sucks to have to internalize that about yourself, that like your deepest tendencies and the way that your brain works has routinely been punished out of you. That you have routinely, consistently been told throughout your life that the way that you act and the way that you think is wrong, should be different, and you just try to make it different even though it psychologically hurts you. That sucks. Like, that's not an easy thing to realize, and that's something that a lot of autistic people go through, and that doesn't make it easy. It's hard. I guess let's get into some examples, like some more concrete examples of my experiences of masking, to kind of both flesh this video out and also hopefully help you better understand what exactly I'm talking about. One of the things that a lot of autistic people mask is stimming, and that is one of the things that I have masked for a very long time. And I started stimming a lot more when I realized I was autistic in like 2016 or whatever, and that's been great for me. Being able to stim without like being ashamed of it has been something that is very comforting. It's helped me regulate my sensory input a lot. It's definitely helped me in like a variety of situations, whether I'm at home or like out in the world. Being able to stim and not feel shitty about it has been very, very helpful for my sensory regulation and my emotional regulation and all sorts of types, like all of the autistic ways of self-regulating and self-soothing, right? Having access to like the ability to stim has been very helpful for me. But I've only recently realized that a lot of the things that I was punished for or like berated for as a child was me stimming. And instead of like anyone picking up on me being autistic, it was something that was punished or like bullied out of me, right? One specific example of this is rocking. I have always been a rocker. Like if I'm sitting in a chair, I will very likely be doing this sort of movement. I don't do it on camera because it feels weird to do on camera still, which maybe it shouldn't, but it does. But like, I'm not a big fan of sitting still. I like to be rocking back and forth or front to back. Front to back is my favorite personally. And I've always been that way. Like there's not a time in my life where I haven't had the desire to like self-soothe or like regulate by rocking, and it feels good to me, and that's because I'm autistic. But as a kid, especially at like the dinner table or sitting with my family, and my brother actually brought this up to me recently. He was like, Ashton, remember when you were a kid and you would rock back and forth and our mom would like yell at you and say like, you're making me seasick? Remember that? And that's all he said, and I was like, huh. Because like, yeah, I do remember that. And having my brother remind me of that at a point in my life where I was/am like rethinking through a lot of the way that I was brought up and the way that my peers treated me, and realizing that a lot of that shaped my autistic masking, was very bizarre of a feeling to be like, yeah, my mom really hated when I would rock as a kid, and that was one of my primary forms of self-stimulation. And being told repeatedly and repeatedly and repeatedly to not do it, and eventually just not doing it and holding it all in, that feels bad. It's something that a lot of parents with autistic kids do, especially when they don't know they're autistic, is tell them to not stim. And whether it genuinely bothered my mom in like a seasickness way, I don't know, I can't say, but I was definitely berated a lot for rocking. Another kind of similar thing that I haven't talked about before online, but I was a thumb sucker as a kid, and I sucked my thumb for way, way longer than like a child developmentally should. And as I know now, right, autism is kind of classified as a neurodevelopmental disorder, so it's not surprising that my development in a lot of different areas was different than other kids, but one of the ways that it was different is that I sucked my thumb for a lot longer than you should, in theory. Again, sucking my thumb was a method of stimming. It's an oral way to self-soothe. It's like a self-soothing, self-regulatory sensory regulation behavior. It's something that helped me. It's something that was sensory-wise good for me. But sucking your thumb can cause like jaw and tooth issues, and it was starting to give me an overbite. So my parents were worried about it, which I guess is fair. I just wish they'd gone about it in a different way. With my knowledge of myself as an autistic person now, what I wish had happened was that like alternatives were provided, right? Different ways of sensory self-soothing, especially orally, were given to me. You don't have to take away the self-soothing behavior. You can replace it with other things that are also self-soothing or like orally self-soothing, right? So to stop me from sucking my thumb, there were 3 major things tried. One of them, the first thing, was a bad tasting nail polish, but I was a stubborn autistic child, which probably not surprising to my fellow autistic people, right? And I just learned to like it, but I continued to suck my thumb and I was like, this doesn't taste half bad. My parents also tried a like shield, like a silicone guard that's like a tube that goes on top of your thumb and gets strapped around your hand. I learned to grab it with my teeth, slide it off my thumb, and then just suck my thumb anyway, or just suck around it because it's like a piece of silicone, right? That feels great in the mouth. So that didn't work either. Finally, I got my only way of describing it is like a cage, but it was like a sharp wire metal cage that was just stuck on the top of my mouth, because when you suck your thumb goes like to the top of your mouth, right? If your thumb comes in contact with this like metal wire, it's not gonna feel as soothing. That did stop me from sucking my thumb, but I instead would play with the wires with my tongue, and I actually ended up with a scar on my tongue from this contraption that was in my mouth for however long it was. One of my like fun facts about myself to this day is that I have a scar down the middle of my tongue because I think it's kind of goofy, I don't know. In both of those things, being discouraged from sucking my thumb, being discouraged from rocking back and forth, caused me to be a lot less comfortable with stimming in general, and learning from an early age that these behaviors, both of them which do the same thing in my brain, make me have a more friendly sensory environment, make me able to regulate the way that my senses perceive the world. Both of those things being so strongly and consistently discouraged really prevented me from being comfortable with stimming, something that is very, very helpful for a lot of autistic people. And there are a lot of other ways in which I was discouraged from stimming in my day-to-day life, especially from my peers at school, because I have always been a big like happy hands person, and that was a big no-no in elementary school. So in addition to my parents discouraging me from doing these things, I had all of my classmates calling me weird for doing these things. So a lot of low support needs autistic people like myself will learn to not stim, and that's a big part of a mask. And that is also why when I was figuring out that I'm autistic, learning to stim again was so deeply important for me, because it is something that I so clearly remember being like punished out of my personality. And that's a very weird thing to have to internalize and learn about yourself. I've also always been like very low on the sociability scale. Like I do not like to socialize, especially with people that I don't know. It's really just not up my alley. I don't enjoy it. I don't like to meet new people. And another part of developing a mask for me was being repeatedly told that not socializing is very abnormal, is not okay, that I have to get out of the corner of the classroom. I can't read books at recess. I can't go to the library at recess. I have to talk to my friends. I have to socialize, and because socializing is normal, even if you don't want to. Another thing on the like social aspect is that I hate ordering at restaurants. I don't go out to eat at all since COVID started, because I just don't, I'm not taking that risk. It's also expensive, but even in high school, I did not want to order at restaurants, and I would want my parents to order for me. And they didn't like doing that, obviously, because it is weird for a teenage kid to not want to order for themselves at a restaurant. But it's really, really hard for me to do, and it's still very hard for me to do. And it takes like a lot of energy to mask enough for me to order or ask someone for something, or like go up to a stranger in any capacity. And that's a part of being autistic. But before I knew I was autistic, it was just me being weird. So it's something that I had to force myself to do. And that's a part of mask as well, because it seems really abnormal for anyone of like my age now, or my age when I was in high school, middle school, whatever, to be so asocial. Part of developing a mask was forcing myself to be more social than I naturally am. Another thing that I remember very clearly is that I would, and to an extent still do, like mimic and utilize the patterns of socializing that my peers use. I remember very clearly in elementary school noticing the expression and the tone shift that one of my classmates would use when asking questions. And I noticed it, and I used that exact same expression and tone shift because I thought that was normal. I was like, I've figured it out. I noticed that this guy does this thing when he asks questions, so I'm gonna do this thing when I ask questions. But then people were like, why are you mocking him? And that's something that was hard for me to understand. For me, learning to socialize didn't like come naturally. I had to actively think about like, what are these people doing? How do you have a conversation? What cues are people picking up on? Because I'm not picking up on them. Being autistic oftentimes feels like a lot of things come to allistic people naturally that just don't process in my head. Social cues and conversations of all varieties just go in one ear and out the other. I'm not gonna pick them up. Like, I need people to be direct with me, or I'm gonna be asking a lot of questions that seem annoying even though I'm just trying to get clarification because I don't understand all of the cues that you are sending. And it is a very, very common experience in autistic people who mask to have to like track and consciously figure out how conversations work in order to have them in a normal way. And I 1,000,000% remember so many times throughout my childhood, during school, etc., where my peers and classmates would make fun of me for not knowing the exact rules. And the way that I figured out the rules was by like figuring out what people thought was weird, if that makes sense. All of this sort of thing also happened with my echolalia. I have always been a massive echolalia enjoyer. I repeat things all the time. It's a great stim for me. It helps me understand things that are being said. I like to repeat things. It's good for my brain. I like it. People around me don't like it that much, which is probably not that shocking. And it is one of the things that I mask still more frequently because it's something that does like genuinely annoy other people, and it is an annoying autistic trait. I only really let myself do echolalia like in the privacy of my own home. But it's definitely also something that has been like Pavloved out of me because it's something that you will be bullied for if you do. Eye contact is another huge portion of masking and something that I force myself to do a lot. Many autistic people have issues with making eye contact. A lot of us don't naturally know how to do it in the way that is developmentally normal for kids to understand. It makes me uncomfortable. It makes me feel like violated to an extent. It just feels unnatural for me to do, and I don't like doing it. So doing it is exhausting, but it is a part of having a mask on because it is required in a lot of ways to be perceived as normal. And these are just a few examples. There are a lot more ways that masking presents itself in my life and in other people's lives. But if you are allistic, if you're not autistic, you may kind of hear all this and be like, I don't see why this is a big deal. Like, these seem like a lot of little things, right? But it's so hard for me to impart upon you and to like describe the depth at which this matters to a lot of autistic people. It is a very draining experience. It is a very depersonalizing experience. Being led to make a mask, being bullied or punished in ways that lead you to create a mask is a very draining experience. It is exhausting. It can lead to anxiety and depression. It can lead to suicidality. We are very likely to be misdiagnosed or wrongly diagnosed, underdiagnosed, etc. As I said at the beginning, I have done like a lot of reading on this, and I will link multiple like easier to read, more accessible articles in the description, but there has been a lot of recent research on the mental health impact of masking, and here's kind of a summary from one of the articles that I'll link. Autistic people who mask more show more signs of anxiety and depression, and this strategy may have even been linked to an increase in suicidal behaviors. I'm not talking out of my ass. This is like a documented thing. You can find more information in the description. Looking back at my own experiences in like psychiatric care, a lot of the way that I was treated and the things that I was diagnosed with, I do not think were entirely accurate. And my anxiety and depression are greatly influenced by the exhaustion and the strain that having a mask can put on an autistic person. I have made videos about having OCD before, but the more that I think about it and the more that I know myself and the more that I look back on how and why I was told that I have OCD, the more that I'm like, I think those are just autistic traits. I have had like a formal diagnosis of OCD, but I'm undiagnosing myself. And on top of all of the like complex mental health related outcomes that having a mask can impact, you've also got like just the overarching experience of being forced out of who you naturally are. It's really, really hard when you realize, I guess, and deconstruct that you have a mask to understand who you are underneath that, especially in my case and in the case of a lot of people, when you develop the need to mask as a young person, when you develop a mask as a young person, it can be really hard to go back and figure out everything that you are underneath that. And it can be scary, it can be stressful to realize and to have to deconstruct that so much of the face that you put on to interact with the world is not who you actually are. And I don't think this is something that I can fully express to anyone that's autistic, because it's just something that is it's such a deeply autistic experience that I do not think I can compare it to anything, because it's very uncomparable. The way that you naturally want to act and the way that the world wants you to act are two very, very, very different boxes, right? And it's not only all of the little examples I've given you. It's like dozens upon dozens of things that all pile up on top of each other, and so many little different things that some of them are little things and some of them are bigger things, but like time and time again, repeatedly and consistently, all of these things about the way that your brain works and the way that you interact with the world, you are told are bad, and you have to find an alternative to them. And that takes a fucking toll on a person. Masking is physically exhausting. It is emotionally exhausting. It can cause autistic shutdown and autistic burnout, and I've experienced all of those things. Not to mention it's exhausting in a sensory way, and it's really, really easy to go into sensory overload by not being able to stim, for example, because you've been trained to not do it. It sucks, and it's complicated, and I just wanted to talk about it for a while. I don't think this video has like an overarching thesis or anything in the way that some of my videos do. This is just more of this is a phenomenon that I wanted to discuss, that I have been thinking a lot about recently, and that I know some of you have also probably had experiences with, and just something that I wanted to, I don't know, chat about for a bit. I think that's all I have to say today, although obviously I have many, many more thoughts on this. I would love to continue have some discussions in the comments if you all want. Thanks for listening to me ramble. Of course, the videos I mentioned and multiple articles on this phenomenon will be linked down below. Are you autistic? Do you have any idea what I'm talking about? Is this foreign to you? Are you autistic? Do you also mask? Are you non-masking? Like, tell me about it. I wanna hear from you also. Goodbye, comrades. I hope that if you're autistic, you get to indulge in your special interests without being mocked, and you can socialize to the extent that you want to with the people that you want to socialize with, and that you have as many autistic friends as you want, and that you are supported and loved because you deserve it. And I will talk to you later, maybe.